Thank you, and I want to thank Taya and Heidi, and I want to thank you for coming out on a Friday evening to come hear about what I think is an extraordinarily important issue. My name is Jamie Gass. I'm director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer Institute. It's a Boston-based independent think tank that has been one of the prime movers on the research side against Common Core for several years now. But we've also been active, really, in the last 20 years behind a lot of the efforts that has made Massachusetts probably the most successful education reform state in the
Excuse
country.
me, Jamie, I don't know if you're so tall you're not getting the mic or if it's not on anymore.
Hello?
You're just too tall. So Pioneer has been one of the prime movers behind a lot of the successful educational reforms that occurred in Massachusetts over the last 20 years. And you have to indulge me for a minute to sort of brag a little bit about the state. So in the early 1980s, President Reagan initiated a commission to look at the quality of K-12 education in this country. It's called A Nation at Risk. And what he found is that the quality and the competitiveness of American public education was really struggling. So rather than having the federal government kind of dictate what it is that should be taught or how to solve it, his commission laid out a lot of the basic information about the local performance. Well, Massachusetts was really one of a handful of the small number of states that back in 1993, Republicans and Democrats sat down and together they crafted a grand compromise. And what they did is that they put a great deal of additional funding into the system, the public system. It's been in the last 20 years, it's been about $100 billion at the state and local level. In exchange for all the hard things that people in public education traditionally have not wanted to do. So charter schools injecting a certain degree of choice into the public system, high academic standards based on the basics of English language arts, math, history, and science. And then they put a teacher test, a high-quality teacher test where the teachers that were going to be teaching our students were actually being tested about their content knowledge and their ability to teach those subjects, as well as a high-stakes test. It was really that combination of reforms in the 1990s that catapulted Massachusetts really from about slightly above the middle of the pack to #1 in the country in the last 4 administrations of the Nation's Report Card, the NAEP test. And in 2007, Massachusetts tested as a single country against the kinds of countries that President Reagan's commission in 1983 had said we need to compete with. So Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, Japan. And Massachusetts was right up with all those high-performing countries. In fact, our 8th graders were tied for first in the world in science. But it was this deep commitment to high-quality, state-driven standards that was the cornerstone for the success in Massachusetts. The folks in Massachusetts, in their wisdom, understood that states under our system of education, states pay for 90% of the cost of education. We don't have a nationalized system of education. We have a collection of state systems. Well, it was the dimensions of those standards are worth looking at because the fact is that they matter a lot. So what did Massachusetts commit to? We committed to 90% of what kids were going to be reading in their English and language arts classes. It was going to be things like Huckleberry Finn, Moby Dick, it's poetry. The vocabulary in those kinds of texts matters enormously. And the reason why it matters is that it's higher quality than you're going to find in almost anything else. And then on the math side, rather than fuzzy math or having kids talk about how they feel math, they restored a traditional teaching of mathematics. That is, by the 8th grade, that you were going to have students that were going to be prepared for Algebra 1 so that as they moved through the system in high school, that they were going to be able to do higher level math. It was really that equation of that high quality academic standards that really catapulted Massachusetts to the top. So, and I think most people would agree. I mean, people on all sides of this issue would recognize that Massachusetts was the state that people were aspiring to. So along came Common Core in about 2009 or so. As Emmett said, it was really began to be developed by a bunch of trade organizations from Washington, D.C., folks that for 20 years or more had wanted to have a national system of education. Mind you, we don't have a national system of education. They had to kind of create it. And what they did is that they took some money from some very wealthy private foundations, and they hooked it up with the Race to the Top that the Obama administration put forward. And so Pioneer, because Massachusetts had done so well, and we're independent researchers, we take no money from the government, we are known for getting the best authors we can and peer reviewing it and telling it like it is. That's sort of what Pioneer's branding is all about. So what we did is at every step of the way, they had 4 different drafts of the Common Core in English language arts and math. So what we did is that we enlisted the best scholars that we could. We enlisted a woman named Sandra Sotsky, who had worked on the standards in Massachusetts. She worked on the standards in Indiana and Texas and a variety of other places. And then we coupled her together with a couple of mathematicians and Silicon Valley engineers who had worked on the very high quality math standards in California. And we said, take a look at this. Tell us what you think. And what they found is that every step of the way, Common Core was of much lower academic quality than high standard states like Massachusetts, California, and Minnesota. So, what were they doing? So the focus of Common Core wasn't taking the lessons that we know from Massachusetts and other states that have a proven record. They weren't taking a lot of the high quality lessons from our international competitors in math and science. What they were doing is that they were dramatically cutting the amount of literature, that quality vocabulary. They were cutting all of that in Massachusetts and high standard states by about 60%. And then in math, what were they doing? They decided rather than have kids prepared for Algebra 1 by 8th grade, they were going to push it back to 9th or 10th grade. So ignoring the evidence that we know from high standard states, that we know from 15,000 pieces of research that the National Math Panel had developed only just a few years before, they just ignored all of that. So that was the academic side of it. So as we got deeper into it, we were curious about it because, as I said, we don't have a national system of education. We have a collection of state systems. And everybody around this conversation, even the proponents of Common Core, they know this because a lot of these folks used to work in the Clinton administration, they used to work in the federal government, they know precisely that there are 3 separate laws. So what did we do? We hired the General Counsel and Deputy General Counsel at the U.S. Department of Education under the second Bush administration, top lawyers, the 2 top lawyers in the federal government in the Bush administration, to take a look at the legal dimensions of Common Core. And what they said was, in a summary of it over there over on the table, what they found was that there are 3 federal laws that are explicit and clear that the federal government may not fund, validate, direct, or drive national standards, curriculum, and tests in any way, shape, or form. So we thought that was pretty good research, and that the people who were responsible for creating laws ought to be the ones who are obeying the laws. There's such good quality research that George Will, about a year or so ago, March of last year, wrote a column called These Pesky Things Called Laws. And it was all about the research that we had done, and it cited the research, and it cited all the legal violations that the U.S. Department of Education and these trade organizations were engaging in. So, again, knowing that the states and the localities are going to pay for 90% of it, because they're the ones who really are responsible for public education in this country, we thought it'd be a good idea if somebody take a look at what it's going to cost. The proponents of Common Core didn't do that. So what we did is we, again, hired the best quality researchers we could, and we had them look at what it's going to cost to implement Common Core. And what we found, and I think it's actually a low-ball figure, I think it's a very conservative estimate, because I think most people know that when the federal government gets involved with things, it doesn't tend to be on the low end of cost. But what we found is that it's going to cost states and localities about $16 billion. So in an era when the states are awash in red ink and their budgets are in very difficult shape, it's going to cost all of us another $16 billion. A state like Ohio, for example, it's going to cost about $600 million. You would think that given the decline in the quality of the standards, the poor quality, the legal issues, and the cost, you'd figure that the advocates of Common Core and the proponents of Common Core would actually bother to talk to state legislators about this. But of course, they couldn't do that because if the state legislators knew about the poor quality and the legality and the cost, they might actually intervene. So there's very few states across the country where a state legislature has actually filed a bill for adherence. Now, almost 2 years after states adopted, now you're starting to find, in the last month alone, there's been 6 states that have started having legislative hearing about it because they know that this is going to come due. They're going to be paying for this essentially unfunded mandate. The final piece of it, Pioneer really, are in our heart of hearts, what we really are as advocates of free market principles and school choice and charter schools. We think that parents actually ought to dictate where their kids go to school, and we're stalwart advocates of that. What concerns us perhaps most about all of this is that on top of the public system having to adopt, there are states like Indiana and Florida and others that have voucher programs that do provide school choice. But the advocates of Common Core have decided that they're going to use those vouchers and the state tests and the state standards that voucher-bearing kids receive to make sure that Catholic schools and private schools have to adopt Common Core too, which is what has happened in a great number of archdioceses across the country. Anyway, I don't want to talk on and on and on, but I think it's suffice to say we have a pile of evidence that shows that the quality is low. These are not good standards. We have a pile of evidence to show that these violate the law. And we have a pile of evidence that it's going to be prohibitively expensive. And we have a significant amount of evidence to show that this is going to curtail school choice for parents. So on that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Crossan. She is a mom from suburban Indianapolis. She and another one of her colleagues managed to do what no one across the country thought was possible. There's an elected superintendent of schools in Indiana, Tony Bennett. He's a rock star. That's what you always hear. He had $3 million in the bank. Everyone assumed that he was going to get reelected. Well, with $1,000 and 1,000 hours, Heather and her colleague, Aaron Tuttle, unseated him last November.